Nipa gunle namdole shing yende gungi genbambu simchen gungi nyen chigo tamje kenla gun chan wamen jege inge bodane dusum sange gungi ngowoni ransim chogo ngusmanten zebe zaywe lame shabla sowa ende tambiche nyamsu lembe kulung sangpo ni chungi sembatang janchupki semdang tembe koni dambiche nyamsu lembe shu.
Please listen to the Dharma and practice the Dharma with the motivation to practice the Dharma with a good motivation, the sacred Dharma, develop renunciation and bodhicitta.
거기도 아주 시럽 넘바 람독제 시럽 넘바 숨기콜라 슈비카브리 되니 가산다 검중기 시럽디 슈비캅슬라 검중외기 닐룩 지신세세기 세강들라다 돈다 쪽디 검세당 닐룩세 닐라 쪽지 당아주 삼록당고 그래서 디슈레 다데나네 가산 검중기 시럽디 검고 그래서 검발했더니 중 그래서니 다 검야디 가르 검 그래서 되더니 닐룩도 검고 그래서니 숨바래 다데나네 가상 검세디 쉬심바래 되니 닐룩들라야 다 지당한주 랑돌기 깝술라 ni lamki nyamsulebe kapsula nilukse chidang thartu khorangi tini nilukdi sini namba 2 benani ta langdor ki nilukse de zo bena chir lunga ki langdor da chadado tini semgi yundengi chada gyungi chadi 랭이 쉐비 토니 아니 랑더 쳐야 되라더니 군주밤 람기 내룩세야 되니 다 텐델 랭이시 셈띵 랭이시 게 되라더니 무슨 제초 그래서 니슈바래
We are currently discussing the three wisdoms. The wisdom that arises from... Oh, can you hear me? I have feedback. Okay. So we are currently discussing the three wisdoms. The wisdom that comes from studying, the wisdom that comes from contemplating, and the wisdom that arises from meditating. And in that context, we are currently discussing the wisdom that arises from meditating. And we have been talking about this a little bit already. we have been saying that the two important points in this line of the verse that says, "The light born of meditation illuminates the natural state just as it is," there are two important points here that we are talking about. First, meditation, and then the natural state. So the wisdom that comes from meditating, we have been talking about, and we have asked the question, what do we actually meditate upon? Where does that, what do we meditate upon that gives rise to the meditation that comes from, the wisdom that comes from meditating? And that is the natural state, the abiding mode. And so the discussion of what meditation means we have completed, and currently we're discussing a little bit about what the natural state refers to. And we said that there are two contexts. One is the context of practicing on the path, where we are discussing what is to be adopted and what is to be refrained from. And then there's the context of discussing the natural state in terms of the ultimate natural state. And we have so far been talking about the path, what is to be adopted and abandoned. And we said that we can generally speak about the actions of our body and speech and recognize what we should do and not do with our body and speech, and then also specifically our mind. And we said that when we recognize the faults and the benefits of certain actions, then we can practice accordingly on the path. So the wisdom here of the natural state, of the abiding mode, refers to certainty with regard to that.
Tani dachidang thartu ki niluk sini sungwa tela tini chwe thamche ki rangshin nam kurangi ngowo tani chi lögin che xiaopa tang, sui xiaopa tang, chulbi wangi nang xiaopa tang, ta xiaopa tindi zani mayin kengi nguyo ki nizu la ani kari segyo re sina, niluk sini segyo re.
When we then speak about the ultimate natural state, then we speak about the nature, the essence, or the nature of all phenomena. That is referring to that which we have not created through imputations with our conceptual mind, which is not due to confused appearances, but how things actually are. That is referring to the natural state.
Ni tatela tini anzu mingi namrang dawo tela tini shidu ki chagya chenpo saya dawo tini anzu ta sarma dawo ina nyuksim dekona ni nyume kisim tini anzu ngajuri nyingma weki chweke kapsula deme ki gombo am kundu sangpo sini tatinsu chasan tardu ki nilu di ki mingi namraji chati ki sungbare.
There are many synonyms for the ultimate natural state. In the Kagyu tradition, we speak about the round Mahamudra. In the new schools, we also speak about the uncontrived suchness, natural state, and in the Nyingma tradition, the natural state also is referred to the ultimate state of Samantabhadra.
Tini tanta nganzu penang Gyud Lama dawa cha shakwa nanda joja di deshi nyingbu cha tigore. Tini da deshi nyingbu se diyang tini tanda nilu kurangi tsengi namranchi cha tigore la labardo da nganzu kagyu nyingma dinzo ki semki nilu dinzo keje shiyangdu deshi nyingbu se di shukchimbo chibichi tani ani dos shi namsha tigore.
Now, here in this course, we are studying the Uttara Tantra Shastra, which has Buddha nature as its topic. And in this context, we also find the term Buddha nature as a synonym for the natural state, especially in the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions. Do we refer to, or do we find a lot of terminology around the nature of mind referring to Buddha nature? And we use the term Buddha nature as the nature of the mind quite a lot.
Tata nanganzu kapsu baba la chaje molangi kapsu la tini nilu jishin se ki tarduk nilu de la kechi shiyangdu tini ta jirdang tarduk nilu di dirwa ine yang da nganzu nyamlin che yongdu ko rinpa chikani drogu gorwa drogu di tini nilu se tini nyi sung yore lu ngöpe nilu dang sem ngöpe nilu se nyi toni tini tanda gomchung weki nilu jishin se di sungdu.
Needed to kind of got it?
Lu ngöpe nilu dang sem ngöpe nilu.
Here in our context of the Mahamudra aspiration prayers, when it says natural state just as it is, that is what we're referring to, right? But when we practice, then we need to go gradually. There are different stages we need to go through. And so in that context, the natural state is also referred to or is addressed in two aspects. The first one being the physical or the body's body entities abiding with natural state and that of the mind.
다 아주 차지 몰람 뒤쪽 차게 전부 슝차들이 도서지 나다 데베고니 냠린 난게 여러 봐 어디 뒤더니 닥게제 된수 레빈 거래.
So since the Mahamudra aspiration prayer is a text that belongs to the Mahamudra, then we need to use this terminology here that comes from the Tantra and talk about the sacred mantra yana.
Teni 당아주 베나 gomba sheda kagyu tawo na chasha kwa ina teni peja shung tama de la teni gechumbo sumji zige yore nangda gyusum sini sama nangdun da gyu taba nipa da teni Gyud Lama se desumbo di teni da tena Gyud Lama densu nangla zo sem ngope nelu di kande imenti ndishi da pela sobe kuni gyachimba gyabyung goyarala teni sama nang tuen dang Gyud Lama nang tinsun nang la ani chidang lusem nika dang lakbar do teni lu ne ngope nelu se tinsu kola teni kande imen dang nyamling kande chigi yome kola tinsu shiragi teni ndishi gyachimba na yore
Sama nang dun dang?
Gyu takwa nipa hefa jira
So as in the Kagyu monasteries and the Shedras, the monastic institutes of learning, this becomes very important. There are three very important texts at the very end of the studies, so one of which is the Samanangdun, then the Hevajra, and the Uttara Tantra Shastra. And the Uttara Tantra Shastra explains specifically a lot about the natural state as it pertains to the mind's nature as well. And the other two texts, they explain about the abiding mode in terms of the physical practice in a lot of detail.
Tadi kola tizu samlo lysim ni ki nyamlen ti chekwa ki gyumsen karire se di tadi hakor chebala tangbo anzu beba ki happiness se chigdala degi segrwa degi sning segere chigni yore ta injila kande nge hakmaso de chig ni di ki na lo la tene ngaran chu ki ta chasang de din la chang de ye sung bare ti kar res na de se du lu de was la bare nga se du tang chu lusim ni de wa ki ba se na sem ki ba la bare tang chu sem jin ji ki degi punsum soba chi yong bar che bala ani ludi dewa che dang sem di ki ba chi ni ga go go res an de ni nang ne chi ma to me na degi punsum soba di yong to go yo mare su ma di ni kandar dor di na de degi se di na la lusem ni ga ki de tu dang du de re.
How should we be thinking about this? Why do we need to practice both with regard to the body and the mind? Why do we have this distinction into the practice of the body and the mind? The Tibetan term for happiness and well-being, two syllables or two words that come together to describe what we usually translate as the general idea of happiness, actually includes two aspects: happiness and well-being, or well-being and happiness. And the aspect of well-being is actually referring to physical well-being, physical happiness. And happiness, or ki in Tibetan, is then referring to the mental well-being or happiness. So the term in Tibetan, deki, describes both the physical as well as the mental well-being and happiness. And together, that is the authentic, true happiness. In order to be actually happy, one needs to have both in place. For what constitutes a being is the coming together of body and mind, and only when both body and mind experience well-being, then that is true well-being or true happiness, real happiness. If one of them is lacking, it's not the full, the entire idea of what happiness is referring to. And so in order to be truly happy, or in order to experience true happiness, the Tibetan term alludes to the fact that we need to have both physical as well as mental well-being.
Dini Chirdang Lusim ni di ngo tate yimba chila ngozin chigare nangbe ki sebu chini. Ine yang Lusim ni ki dewa di chidang ni shuk chumba chi yobatan lakbar do dini nganzu chachenda nga la sobe kapsula di ni ki dewa di shiraki shuk chumba chi deshe gyabere la nyamle yang di nashin chi chigare.
Generally, in the Buddha Dhamma, we clearly distinguish between the body and the mind. But here in this context, there's also a strong emphasis on the happiness of, or the well-being of the body, because of the emphasis in the Mantrayana or in Mahamudra on bliss, on physical bliss, the great bliss or happiness that is being experienced. And so describing the practice is then also in these terms.
An teka nashi ngara zuta pena lidang sim nibu di tendang temba lu di tendang sim di temba yimba chitang teni lu ki netsa saya di kandi chila ngozin chigirisi ngaran su ki lu saya di lata chidang lu saya di shat thak kyangba segeyo marita nga su lu saya di tanga di nangi energy dabu shirwa, nyuba dabu shirwa, dindula segeyo. Di tu yongdu dini nganzu kari segirisi na sini segeyo res labari. Nesa di lu tu pala dini chungo res da, nganzu tuk sidi chik imbalance chadu di. Dega na shingi dini sem ki nesa saya diyan dini semba di matuk bayi na ani sem ki nesa di yungayo mare semba di chik sangi yaudu tende ki kaala tu yongdu dini sem nasa saya di chungayo isla mare dega na shingi sem ki nasa dila teni lu le tsu nasa yongya tang lu korangi nasa la teni sem ki nasa tsu kiye tang da tende ki ten begi dewa yore esini da tende sungu yore.
Likewise, it is also explained that the body and the mind stand in a relationship of the supported and the support and the supported. So the body is the support and the mind is that which is supported by that body. And if we consider what it means to be sick, first of physical sickness, we need to understand that the body is not only referring just to flesh and bones, but also the energies and potentials that constitute our physical body. And when these energies are unbalanced, when they are disturbed and unbalanced, then that's what we are referring to as sickness. That's when we are sick or ill. And the same also applies to the mind. what are we referring to when we speak about mental illness? That is actually when the mind is disturbed. When the mind is undisturbed, when all the good and bad and the mind is undisturbed and when it is balanced, then we are not sick. But when there's disturbance, when there's no balance in the mind, then we're referring to that as the mental illness or sickness. And the mind and the body can also influence each other in that sense that when the mind is disturbed, when the mind is sick, that will affect also the body, and make the body also sick. And then the body's illness can also affect the mental well-being, the mental health, and make the mind also sick. So there's this connection where body and mind influence each other as well.
Hinayanda lisim ni ki nani nupati sim ki nupati shira chigre sumbare azu bejo tang to baina ti indu lu ki simla wangyur che di nupati chungre sim ki tini lu la wangyur che di shira ki tini nupati chumbu yungu sumbare.
But when we consider the influence of body and mind on each other, then the mind is said to be more powerful. The ability of the mind to influence the body is bigger, while the control that the body has over the mind is less strong.
Dadang ansuda Lusur dan simsur ni di shira chi iwa cheto umedwa ngaransu tamabe kansai na lubu nawa dan lamsang simba churwa da nejo bada wuji imba inani dini lusur dan simsur ni di iwa chini lula pena nesa shuk chumpa ji poda yaba inaya dadung ya simba dila matu ni tempo ne tube dinde da mambu yungo yore.
For us common people, ordinary people, it is very hard to distinguish between the physical and the mental states in that way. So if we're physically sick, that automatically very quickly also influence our mental well-being. The influence of physical sickness is very strong on our mind, while experienced practitioners, they can more clearly keep these two apart. So there are a lot of accounts of practitioners who, even when the body is very, very sick, when there's a severe sickness on the physical level, they can keep their mind undisturbed by that and can remain within a undisturbed and stable state of mind, even though the body is very sick.
Deyan chidang anzu tangi shubha nanshi nangpa tang lakbar tu ngak kapsula tini lusim nindi ngo tate yinpa kanshila yang lega jiyondu ko dewa chimpuchi yobachi sungu yore dinde indu nyamlen yang tina shin chege yore tadi pesha na nganzu semdi da ko nganzu ina the software da wache ani sugu di hardware da wache da konyi chidang jana ko pekhagarwa chigdi sugjen dan chigdi sugme da wore chigdi dul da wore chigdi da kare lagin hag maso ine ya konyi di lega jiyondu ya chigi chila shira tengo kudu ba da tende da wache teni yang chigi chila chig nganzu ina influence shuk chumbo yong chokudu ba
within the Buddha's teachings, especially in the Mantrayana, it is recognized that while body and mind are different entities, two different things, in practice, the connection, the relationship when doing something is very strong. So the connection is very strong, and we can think of this as we think of software and hardware. The mind would be the software, and the body is the hardware. While the mind is something without form, is non-physical, and the body is physical, in order to function, in order to do anything, both body and mind need to work together. They both have an impact, and they're both necessary to work together.
Tadi ani pena nganzu suputi nangla nipa tso de sumye sumare tanganzu lungdang tiba peken sigrwa totina tachi nipa tso da sumchi didi chanyam tu ni suputi deo yunga ye sumare ta de nani kaya chi chu yong tu shuk chechun cha tu tini ngaranzu supi nesa mabu yunga ye.
When looking at the body, for example, we usually identify three main influencing forces. That is the winds, the flame, and the bile. And when these are in harmony, when they're in equilibrium or in harmony, then we are healthy. And when they are disturbed, then that is the state of sickness.
Ta dega nashi nganzu semla chidang nganzu docha ki cha, shedang ki cha, timo ki cha sani tindi sungu yore. Ten ina ya tanda nganzu ta tanda nganzu de kapsula ta lu ki niluk segura, lu niluk sedi kapsu tsogo tila tini chidang ki shata rangde segi yo mare di ko rakpa dhawu chiruba. Ani ngaranzu la namshe ki tendu gyurbe ki ani ta tabi lu tindi sugu nala tindi shiyore sumbare ma tenzu la segi yore ta dela tini namgyu nganzu tsa dang lung dang tini tile segire kabla tsa lung ani nambar shepa asini dosti shikyabu warwa.
When we talk about the mind, we can we also distinguish three things often: the aspect of the mind of desire, attachment, aversion, anger, and ignorance. Coming back to the body, though, we are speaking about the natural state of the body, and body here doesn't refer to blood and to flesh and blood. That is a very coarse manifestation of the body. We can also look at the body in terms of that which is brought forth, created by cognition, consciousness, which is the subtle body. And there we speak about the channels, winds, and essences, or sometimes also the channels, winds, and consciousness.
Tenita anju chajin la sobe kapsula ina ta jirang namki naru chutuk ta teni tsalung tende ki nyamlin nangwe toni ani lu ne du numbala teni teni sem la gyurwa tep chuya tang sem ki kyun ki chadun so pa kaya tang nyungro tanya tang yundin ki chadun so ya ma kepa cheba tang kepa gongbal tanya teni kita nyamle mangpo yoro ba tsu chigi yoro ba.
In the context of Mahamudra, we find the 6 yogas of Naropa, for example, where a lot of Talmud practices are done. So the practices of the channels and winds. And those are practices that allow us to use the body in order to influence the mind. So based on the body, then the mind is being influenced, and the problematic aspects, the faults within the mind, can be eradicated or diminished, and the qualities can be generated where they have not been present before, and existing qualities can increase. And there are many practices in that sense.
Na chidang nganzu lusim sili le dangpo pa ina nganzu dawa ina ta to zichik lu la gyushu ti zo ta nganzu pena gomdawa jabki ina guye dedang yakpo deba ina ani digi gomdi yakpo yungo yore sungo yorwa ani lu ki tabla teni semla to zo yakpo yungo tabshi chigo yore ta yang ji ko tokwa tumbo dawa yinba ina ni sem ki lu la pa karase gore wangji tu gore.
Generally, when we talk about the body-mind relationship here, as beginners, we're actually, the influence of the body is very strong, in the sense that when we start to meditate, then our physical posture is very important, because the physical posture in our body becomes a method for meditating well, so for also having a proper mind. So when we sit well, then meditation will also said to also turn out well. And for highly realized practitioners, it also goes the other way around. So they can control the mind, they can control the body with the mind.
Chidang nganzu peshana both dawachina da both kawachida mawa dawach niyo pa ina switch dawach niyo na ani sosola lok di kawa pa nyi tudu ani kawa ki switch di nim lok mawa di pa nyi tudu mawa ki switch di nim na ante nashi lok ji bar yung tuwa ani lusim nyi ki dewa de tini chiyo sila bari tini lu ne tu nun ne ani sem di da soso ki sangbo cha di gongbel tanya tang ngimba cha di kao tuwe tinte ki tini ta tinte ki chunyi tinte yore sungbari nga su lusim nyi ki dewa la.
When we have, let's take an example here. When we have switches and light bulbs, and when we, let's say we have a light bulb, and there's a red switch and there's a white switch, and accordingly, when we press the red switch, then the light will be red, the red light will turn on. When we press the white switch, then the white light, or the normal light will turn on. Equally, that also applies to the body and the mind connection. So when the physical posture is correct, then we can actually support, or that will support the arising of the positive aspects in the mind and reduce the negative aspects. So in that way, there is a very strong connection for us between the body and the mind.
Tadi peti tine sungere tsa lung tanda nga su nge lu ne lu ki chi shigarwa lu nga pe ne lu sa di tabe lu sa di tani tsa lung dang ngara su sheba de sumbudi peshana lamga ji che lamga ya go ji che ta do sa ani de gang la ta ji yo ba che ani ta de gang la mi ji shön de na ba ta de sum gi dewa di lamga yo sa la ta ju gre ta do sa la mi di lep ru ba tene le pesha yo re tene pe de kan de re sana ta namshe se di mid na shin chres ta kan la shön mid na shin chres la tene da ta de ka wa do sa la mi di lep ru ba tene ta di gar res na lung res la bare namshe di lung la tem bare es lung de ka wa la ten yo res na tene tsa la ten yo res sung bare tsa di gar re lam kha na shin chres la bare ta di ka wa la gyu gre su di ko lamba ka wa yo sa la gyu ru ba wa tene de ta tsa da lung da namshe sung di ta da mi da ta da tene ala pe gyu se ke lam kha na shin tene chi tene pe sha ni sung yo re.
When we talk about the natural state of the body here, then we are speaking about the subtle body. And as mentioned, there we speak about the channels, winds, and consciousness. And there's an example given for the relationship between the three, and that is the relationship of a road, a horse, and a person, a rider. So if we have a very good road or path, then a horse can run on that path, and wherever the horse runs or wherever the horse goes, then the person that rides that horse will also go. And what is meant with this example is that the consciousness is like a person riding a horse, like a horse rider. Wherever the horse goes, the person goes, the rider goes. And the horse needs to go on a path or a road. That's where the horse can run. And the horse is here exemplifying the wind. And the horse needs a road to run on, as the wind needs the channels to run in. And so wherever the path goes or the road goes, the horse will go. And with the horse comes the rider. Accordingly, where the channels are exemplified by the path, wherever the channels are, then if there are good channels, then there's the wind, the horse in the example, and the consciousness that comes along with the wind that rides the horse.
Pena tanda ngara su miki su thong go ba ngasu amjo ki dat thwe go ba ta te kapsula tini lega chasang de sui chi ge resna ani tsa nang la lunggi nang la number shape de gyu de ge tini digi lega de chi ge yoba song za ngasu du si nyam su nyung go re su tong wa ta dat thwe ba ta tin no ba den
An example for what this entails is that right now we see forms, right? With our eyes see forms, our ears hear sound. How does that work? It actually comes from the workings of these aspects of the subtle body. So because the winds move in the channels, and the consciousness is brought about through the winds, the perception actually functions in that way.
Tene lakpartu lungdang shepa nyi yorba shida getini lunglaya tene mangbo yor chidang lung rakpa da lung rawa tene tawe lungdang shepa nyi bodi halam chik yewa che mituba na shingi shida ki chik dewa chumbo ju sung yor tati pedi nying jeba shayra kuna nyi shida ki penzun chigi chigla tenti yor bodi pe kante shayra sana ta dangi pedi shiyo baya na pena taji yorba tadi kari resana ani karaso lung rawa lung di tene longwa na shi des ta tadela mig me ba kangba da yorba koran kangba la bot ina mig yo mare ta lung di na shin shin slar tene sheba di kangba yo mare sla bare mig yo res la bare ta nga zu peji shana ta longwa chik dang 아니 미 강바 매교니지 냠도 도고도 나 컨주 니 시라게 찍을 찍 땡고 그러 봐. 찍 매네 찍 내가 제 마토 바다와 차 그러 봐. 된데기 대화 숙좀 버지 예수문이다. 룽다 셰바니기 대화들라 시라게 숙좀 무슨 하래. 차별 룽다.
Especially the connection between winds and cognition is very, very strong. There are different kinds of winds, the more subtle and the more coarse one. The extremely subtle winds are said to be very, very difficult to distinguish from actual cognition. They depend on each other very, very strongly. And so they're hardly distinguishable. That's how close the connection between these two is. And the illustration for how they depend on each other, how closely they are connected, is a blind horse and a legless rider. In order to go anywhere, these two need to work perfectly together, right? If there's a horse that doesn't see, doesn't have eyes, or is blind, it doesn't know where to go. And if the rider has no feet to go by himself, then he needs to rely on the horse. So the blind horse and the legless person, rider, they need to work extremely closely together. Their connection is very, very strong. And the same, like this exemplifies how the cognition and the subtle winds have an extremely close connection to function.
디인도 단당한주 베바기 다 베바스나 민도 아주 지당 아주 샤르초기 맨단 줄로니데 대화 좀 보여라 라과도 베바기 되니 맨단 쉐니데 대화 좀 보여라 다디 나랑 아주 페나 다페제 등상기 셈니 망고치도 와 셈니 차상들랑 아주 메디컬 코랑기 쩨라 룽스네 다디 세도다 룽라 차룽 짜룽 아가세 속룽 다디네 망고지 샤요레 룽디 tapena ta ko sharati ani kawakasala jugdutitini nyora sugurwa ko mi shira je yamar ko kangba yamarwa tini tadi gitini dosa lamgala mando waje kawakasala jugsha wa ne tini nyora sugurwa ta nganju tanda anxiety depression ta simginesa mangbushto wa chasang ditini lungdi tu yongdu ani dus yonggo sindu jishikagura.
This connection is very important for not only Tibetan medicine, but generally the traditional aspects of medicine in Asia. But especially in Tibetan medicine, we speak about mental disease in terms of wind disease, problems with the winds. So the medical terminology for what we call mental diseases nowadays is referring to different kinds of lung diseases, different types. And this is likened to the example of the blind horse and the legless rider. When the blind horse is not guided by the rider who can see, then that blind horse will just run everywhere. If it gets disturbed, if it's spooked, then the blind horse will just be out of control and go everywhere. And so that's the image we can take for what we call nowadays anxiety and depression. They're all wind diseases, the disturbance of the winds.
Tachidang ngazu di lung se di lung la srwa chik dos wind le gyurgo rwa ine ya zo dikap sala lung se di ngara zu ki chik kare so garba ji movement energy da washirwa movement pena namshe di pa yula thotwe ki move je thwe ki energy da wachila ni zo se gyore.
Now we're translating the term lung here as wind, but what we need to understand as wind is that it's actually referring to movement energy to move something from one place to another, to move around. So for the consciousness to move towards the object, we need an energy that propels that, or that allows that. And that energy, that movement energy, is what we're referring to as wind.
So physical object na pena motor dawashina ko move jeba la ji engine dawash gogorwa energy gogorwa dega na shi ngaran su semba dila ko yula thowa pa move jeba la yowal jeba la ni ko nyuba ji gogore stila tini ngansu lung se gore.
So when we think about physical objects, physical things like a car, for a car to move, it needs an engine. It needs something that allows the car to move. And for the mind to be enticed, for the mind to move towards the object, it also needs something that gives that energy, or is the energy that entices and brings the mind to the object. And so that's the wind.
Dapena ngazu chi lepa ke jeta washewa na lepa ki kare ji suk thong war chebal ha ko war chebal ko ki chi neuron ki movement ji ko wa ti ma chena suk thong to marwa tinde kitane ne pa ta wachila so sungare.
So when we consider sight, there needs to be some brain energy being put in, like some brain activity put into action. So there needs to be some neurological movement, and that is this potential, this energy that we're talking about. It puts that into movement, neurological activity.
치료 유 냠수 냠을 제발라 레벤난기 neurotransmitter 된서 파수 묵제 구도라.
So in order to see an outer object, the neurotransmitters need to be activated, right? They need to move.
나서 다 도르디나 되니 땅아주 델라더니 덴데기다 도르디나 남시 따지랑 델라 타랑 망보여레나다 고데버지나 number shapes 되니 number shape기 텐디 룽치 되니 룽기 텐디 짜스 다 덴데기 되니 다 덴디 대양지 수수도 받더니 가 말에 거랑이지 뉴바다고 절 조세거래 숙매기 되니 수수 마두빈 둘두바 마인바 덴데기 되니 뉴바다고 개주된 줄라 시거래 텔라더니 타빌루스 다디 아니 아주 셈기 마릭바당 릭비시 툴당 마툴 코 망버직 기 하트웨어다고디 코차디게 요반데 내가 주버 지겨래라 안데니라 남규 땡땡바세거봐 타비 류든줄라틴 땡스라 되니 되게 땡이 중샤베게 넘버 쉐바든 줄라 땡바스니 아니 도스은 거
In short, we speak about different states of consciousness, more subtle and more coarse, and we speak about the just general how cognition consciousness depends on the winds and the winds depend on the channels. This is not described in a coarse physical way. Here we do not speak about material forms made up from particles, but the subtle body in terms of energy and the movements of energy. And so the channels and the winds, they're supporting the cognition, and there are different states of like ignorance that are being propelled or not propelled, and we can think about the subtle body as being like hardware of a computer, and in that manner the subtle body, these three aspects, they function as the support for consciousness, and they allow for consciousness to arise and function. So we have the connection between the subtle body and the mind of being the support and the supported.
다 덴데기 셈응업인 일루디 야고 뮤르부직 하고와르제 발라 류응업인 일루든수 냠닌 지구에 송아래 아니 덴데기 류응업인 일루든수 다 자룽 기코디 나게 갑술라 숭그레 나게 갑술라다 탑게 비림바다 셔럽 조그 림바스네 나게 냠닌 차상데 니니나나 소용도 와 아니 다 된데 거디 또 냠린 조디 가디 남겨요랬으나 아니 조디 셔럽 조버린 바스니다 조그림게 냠린 값을 하더니 군습 장주기 셈 미규린 대화 침보 댄스니다 되니 막 무슨 그래
So, for that reason, when we consider the natural state with regard to the body and body entity, actually, we also find explanations about it in the sutra teachings on the absence of characteristics. When we consider the teachings on the close application of mindfulness, there we consider the body, sensation, and mind, right? Body, feelings, and mind, and the body is considered as impermanent, the feelings as, or experience of sensations as suffering, and the mind as being empty. So there we also find a connection and the progressions between the body and the mind. Now, when we consider the meditation, which illuminates the natural state just as it is, so the strong connection between the natural state of the body and the mind, that is being explained then in the Mantrayana. So that's there's a stronger emphasis there. So in order to come to know, come to realize the natural state of the mind entity, we need to rely on the practice on the natural state, the abiding mode of the body. And so that's where the Tsalung practices, the practices of the channels and winds, comes in. Generally, in the Mantrayana, we can summarize all practices into those that generate the method and those that generate the wisdom. And so the knowledge of the abiding mode, the natural state of the mind, is part of wisdom, which is being addressed in the completion stage aspects of the practice.
당은서 차징의 값을 했더니 탑기 람당 돌비 람tendia 순고도 탑 돌스니 탑람 나루 주루 돌람 차게 침보 순게도 보더니 우도와 드니 안주 닝마다와이나 계속 조친 순순그래 탑게 베림바 셔럽 속 베림바 드니 조친스니
So in the practice of Mahamudra, we speak about the path of the method and the path of liberation. The path of the method is referring to the 6 yogas of Naropa, while the path of liberation is referring to the practice of Mahamudra. And in the Nyingma tradition, we distinguish 3 aspects. The first, the generation stage, which is referring to the method part or aspect, then the completion stage practice, which is referring to the wisdom aspect, and then completion, which is Dzogchen, the great perfection.
드니 제당 아주 셈기 땐데 가르레세데 섬었다나 배제다 되수다면 망보여래 kashi tadubdan dewa yoda bare kashi rishunda dewa yoda bare dwa penanda ngazu jidang samtang bayina baba chigla kejiti bayina sem kawa yor islam ngazu del zugre raba ningla zugre tini ta peje ta nupcho bayi ba dawa ne sem kawa yor islam sang de lepal zugro wa zugdo khawra ba ta ngazu Asia dan lawar do ngazu nangjo ge kapsula ya tini ning se de ta yang ji sem de zo ji lang wuzin ji ge re
If we ask where the mind is or what the support for the mind is, then we will get different answers. There are different answers based on philosophy or culture. If we ask a Tibetan, for example, where the mind resides or what supports the mind, they will point straight away at the heart. While when we ask where the mind is, if we ask a Westerner where the mind is, most people will point at the brain. So there's this difference. But specifically in Asia and the Buddha's teachings, the support for the mind is identified as the heart.
adela gyumse mangbo yore chedang ngansu do sinyi tepe kapsula ngansu subu gi wangbo mangbo yore ba wangbo gechu mangbo yore dinzu kola leba kola shira dishi yo mare da tini yina yang nga ge kapsula tini leba dang da tinde kola yungu yore da chedang leba di wangbo da wangbo organs yorba ge chimbuji imbala ngojin ji gore tini da kangdar lepadang semnika lepadang da ninga stingse yorba nika nyamdo lega chini tini shepadi jeku gres da tinde ki nga kapsula da tinde ki samlo tangso de shukchumbu chungu ba
There are many reasons for that, but we can consider that in the general Buddhist teachings, when we consider the sutra teachings of the characteristics, then we identify the different faculties, the sense faculties and so on. And in those descriptions, when talking about the faculties, there's no talk about the brain. There's actually not much mentioning of the brain and what it does. But in the mantra teachings, in the secret mantra, there is actually talk about the brain, which is identified as a very important organ, as a facilitator, a faculty that is an organ here. And so that is identified, and it is also said that the brain and the heart, they need to work together.
dan namju ngaju go dewa dawa chidi ta inte dawa lam na ti ko nyamdo lega che ko di ta ning di subconscious mind dawa che ani leba di conscious mind dawa ji nganju namju nangba ki bakcha se ki share wa ta kunshin namshe ta nangba ki sheba ki she onde ko wangbo dang mangbo ji ki she wa 아니 가리제바 있네야 땐 군신 남시에게 땡돌로 바자 샤니 아니 대파 프로세스 제니 아니 아나솔 나와지 샤르 용거래 있으니 미셰당 나셰당 제셰라소 같은 소 안데다 탐지에게 중사기 시자 사본다오디 sem yi kunshi number sheba tindul baja shapa ti member tine chungba rest ji ke gora tindida ningi ti subconscious mind da wata peche tinde da waji dati ni tinde dishe to peche nang da tinde mi su me maro ina nga zu tingsang ke ji tang da tinde da sam tang ba ina ya ti su ji digi me ro sam da waji dingi du ji jene yang in nori ro ha mo.
To put this in a easily understandable way, we can probably talk about the the heart and the mind as relating to the subconscious and the conscious aspects of the mind. So the heart would constitute where the subconscious is, subconscious mind, and the brain would be the conscious aspect. In Buddhism, we speak about the habitual tendencies that are being deposited or that are that are being deposited in the all-ground consciousness, the alaya vijnana, and so that facilitates through the ripening of those habitual tendencies from the all-ground consciousness, from the alaya, then the process ensues that appearances occur, meaning that eye consciousness occurs, perception of the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so forth. All the appearances occur through the process of all-ground consciousness habitual tendencies and the ripening process of those. So in that way, we can probably correlate the mind, the alaya, the underlying principle of consciousness, with the heart. So that's the subconscious part, while the perceptions that come from that will then refer to, so the conscious aspect of cognition and consciousness then would refer to the brain, or correlate to the brain activity. That is not explained that way in the text, but just thinking about the modern ways of looking at the connection of conscious and subconscious, I think this is probably how we can view it. I might be wrong about it, but I think we can draw these correlations here.
Jida indi rawa ngansu nangbe ki sem ke che shiwa ka so la dani namshe cho ge ta din na ne wang she dan yi she se di yewa se bu che gore ani dine de ga na shin gi ngansu namshe ke dang da namshe ki tin ta wi lu de ke che shiwa de dini ta za zo sum za u ma roma kyang ma da de ga na shin gi dini chi wo da sani ki kholo da de zo ke che shiwa gore ba denzo keche shiyong de ni ninga ki kholo se de shira ke chum buchi ge re nge gimzen de zul den shu ge ama da buchi ge re ninga ki kholo se de.
In Buddhism, we speak about the 6 or 8 types of consciousness, and within those presentations we clearly distinguish between the sense consciousnesses and the mind consciousness and so on. And when we talk about the way that these consciousnesses occur, how consciousness arises, mind arises, then the connection is drawn to the channels and the winds, and so there are 3 channels: the central channel, the Roma, and the Kyangma, right and the left channels. And we also speak about the importance of the chakras, and specifically emphasizing on the heart chakra, which is like the mother of the chakras. So, in that sense, because of these descriptions, I'm drawing the connections here.
라서 다 tortina 안주 niluk setila tini lungopun nilutang semngopun niluk ni samutang kugores anju komyonde nyamlin jeyongde tini antizuni pensun tendang tembe suldala nedeveres tini da lungopun niluk seti ani ngaju namba sanje beke zadang longdang tilela sopa tabili tindechila deshekyani tini denzu nedu numbala tenne semngopun nilukdi ngondo gyurbeki lam tini sungwere denzu la tini tabki lam sini sungwere la denzu la tini lungopun niluk sigiyore esini ani nge lama di mituni chima shugirwa.
So, in short, when we read the natural state here, then the natural state can be identified in two aspects: the natural state of the body entity and the natural state of the mind entity. And so that's how we identify it in the context of practice. And the body and the mind, they have this connection of the support and the supported. And when in practice we emphasize on the balance of the subtle body in terms of the channels, winds, and cognition, then this supports the mind, and therefore is the path of the method that, the natural state of the body refers to the path of the method here. And the rest I will then speak about next time.
So, tini ngaju semngopun niluk denzu kola chima mituni shugins.
So I will speak more about the natural state of the mind entity then next time.
Chanchu semchu rinpoche magye panamanke gyurenche keba nyambara meba gone gondo pelbara sho